So it's just after the hour, and we'll get started and kick this off. So we're here today for a live on ServiceNow community webinar with tips for strengthening your third-party risk management program. We're here with IRM Authority, and we're delighted to have you here as our guest and one of our key partners in risk. So just before we get started, we do have to go over the safe harbor statements. We obviously, as ServiceNow, we're a publicly traded company. So Karina, if you could just advance to the next slide, fantastic. If we do share any forward-looking details, we like to be as transparent as possible in these webinars and answer as many questions as we can. If there's anything that's roadmap related, that may be forward-looking, and we do hold it to our own that we have unknown risks and uncertainties and factors that could cause for changing results. But we'll definitely answer as much as we can and be as transparent as possible. So for the next slide, if you'd like to use that QR code, that is an easy way for you to sign up for more webinars and meetups in our community. I'll share a link in the chat later when I'm done talking. But we'd love to have you come and join as many webinars as possible, participate as much as possible, ask questions, and make this as interactive as we can. So we try to provide these on a regular basis, and that's the best link to sign up. And as I said, I'll share the URL in the chat later. A couple more housekeeping issues. We do ask that you put your questions in the Q&A, as I've mentioned. Because we do save that for future topics and interest, but it's a lot better than putting in the chat because that doesn't get maintained. But definitely put those in, and we will save time for Q&A at the end. The presentation is also going to be recorded and saved in the community, so if you need to reference something or if you need to jump off if we get a little bit long, by all means, you can come back and we'll put that up there as soon as the recording is available. And after the event, when you close out, you will be asked to complete a short survey. And again, we use this for informing ourselves as we develop these programs moving forward. So we'd really appreciate your feedback. So just before we get started, I'd really like to welcome Karina and Hartaj for joining us today on our webinar. Karina is a senior IT executive with an extensive background in helping companies mature their governance posture and health. She's a forward-looking and innovative advisor who blends technology with business and keeps your key areas in mind as she advises companies across your risk programs. Karina brings many years of experience both working in the industry as well as running her own consulting business for nearly a decade, advising clients on their own compliance, security, and governance postures. And I was delighted to meet her last week at our ServiceNow risk event in California. So welcome, Karina.
Thank you.
And Karina is joined today by Hartaj Kandola. Sorry about that. Hartaj complements Karina's business savvy with extensive enterprise platform technology experience. He brings decades of experience as well, but more on the technology side in successfully delivering solutions to address the strategic business goals. As the Chief Technology Officer for IRM Authority, he is responsible for setting the overall strategy for technology implementation and best practices. He also has deep ServiceNow experience, having worked across the platform as a subject matter expert for ITSM, security ops, IRM, working in program management, business processes, and performance analytics. So welcome to you both today to the webinar, and I'll pass this over to you, Karina, if you'd like to introduce yourself and start the really, really in-depth presentation for today.
Thank you. All right. Appreciate everyone joining us today, really a lot. It's early in the morning for some of you. So wanted to kind of quickly go over this and give a few asterisk items here. The first asterisk item, I think, is terminology. So, right, we're kind of evolving this piece of the platform. So there may be some interchangeable words here, some third-party risk management, some vendor management, whatever you call it in your company. ServiceNow says yes. You can call it whatever you like to, right? And it's all okay because really the platform is scalable enough to handle all of that. I, in my presentation, may use words interchangeably. So just kind of a caveat that we tried to keep it consistent, but different companies call it different things. So it's fine if there's a slip. The other thing is we kind of broke out the whole life cycle into 4 sections. We're going to go into some really things that we hear over and over again about things that you ought to include in your questionnaires. And so we're going to put a little bit more focus on that. But unlike our prior webinar, we're going to put more time into the demo. So I'm going to try to talk fast, but not too fast, although I do talk fast. So we'll try to, I'll try to be as clear as possible. And I am going to go ahead and take myself off for camera for the rest of this so we can pay attention to all the great animation here that's going to be happening on the screen. All right. So I'm going to go a little bit bold here, folks, and I'm going to really start with your governance, right? The governance of your company really needs to be dictated by your IRM, right? Your integrated risk management, your GRC programs, where you have those published governance documents, whether they're, it says policy here at the bottom, but inside ServiceNow, that's the table name, right? But these are your processes, your standards, your procedures, your templates, your whatever is the thing that provides guidance to the people running the vendor management, the third-party risk management program, right? It really starts at that governance level. And you need to make sure that those documents are providing the right amount of information to make sure that this program is continuous and flows, because you're going to take those control objectives and you're going to actually attest against them and show how well you're doing to the auditors and gathering that evidence. So we're going to get into that in a minute. We've broken this out into 4 sections. First one really is that identification, kind of that calibration of, who's the vendor? Why am I here? Why am I doing this? Doing that identification. Second one is kind of what questionnaire does that vendor get? I don't want to send out, more and more questions. I want to send the vendor the right questionnaire in the beginning, and there may be different questionnaires based on what that vendor is doing for me, right? I want to make sure that I'm carefully taking a look at the replies that I'm getting back from that vendor. And then, of course, I want to make sure that I'm understanding that vendor long-term. What are they doing for me? Again, you could call this operational monitoring. You can call it continual monitoring. You can call it, continual improvement. You can call it really whatever you want to. You may see something on TV that says, oh, well, this third party went and had a breach. Well, you may want to trigger off an assessment. That might be one of your conditions. So we're going to be talking about that as well. So let's start with the first piece over here on the top right-hand side, right? So let's talk about identification. This is the thing that really kicks off this process. So again, I'm going to start every single one of these because the guidance that we're going to get is out of our published documents, right? It's saying to us, we have to adhere to this regulation and this framework. And the example we're going to use in our demo is HIPAA, which actually requires a BAA, right? There's 2 citations in HIPAA that says you have to vet your vendors, right? You have to have a contractual obligation signed. So you have this governance oversight. You're going to have your control objectives, and then you're going to have those triggers defined. Maybe you're getting a new service and you want to have your legal department start kind of, asking you to do an assessment. Maybe you have an existing vendor already in place, but they're not meeting their SLAs. Maybe you're thinking about moving away from that third party, and you're saying, I want to start looking for a replacement, maybe 6 months before the contract's expiring, so that I can figure out if they could do a little bit better for me before I go into the next contract cycle. So you definitely want to control how much ability you have to actually to you have the control of this. So your goal is basically proceeding with the third party based on what's happened. So sending questions. This is pretty important, right? So again, your governing document is going to tell you, you have your vendor identified. You're going to know what third party receives which questionnaire. This is really, really important. You need to define the parameters for the timing. The goal for this section is really to make sure that the right questions get sent. And this is the part we kind of want to hone in on, especially with all of kind of the security considerations that are honing in on and kind of introducing this concept of third party and fourth party, right? So you have your company has data, right? We know this. Potentially some of your data is sitting at a vendor's. And so some of the considerations you need to ask about in your questionnaire is, of course, some of the basic stuff, right? Especially if your data is stored, transported, or processed, you need to make sure that you're understanding at that vendor location, how many people have access to that data, your data, at a heightened privileged level, right? How often are they purging your data? Have you provided them data classification and destruction guidelines? Right? What are your insurance provisions should they lose some of your data? Breach notifications are actually really important because some contracts actually that I personally have read say we don't have to notify you of a breach unless 6 months goes by, right? GDPR says 72 hours. So you have to make sure that you're going to make sure to carefully ask these questions as part of your questionnaires. The last bullet here is pretty important, right? So data at another vendor. So if we go along the diagram at the top, the data at vendors, imagine now if your vendor went and of course they have other data, right? But they took some of their data and they sent it to their vendors. What if your data is involved in that pass, right? So unfortunately, what we're seeing right now is this is perpetual. You need to be really careful and ask, how many passes is your data being moved downstream? You need to, call your insurance company and say, if my vendor is passing on my data to their vendor, how much control do I really have? And you got to understand those downstream controls all the way down, they don't have the same, due diligence of physical, logical controls as we do in our own space. You can't really vouch for that stuff. So you have to be very careful and ask these very, very specific questions. So the one more other consideration for the people who ask for SOC 2s as part of their vendor vetting kind of process. So please, when you receive those SOC 2s, do a Control F and look for the word subservice organization, please, because many, many SOC 2s do not include subservice organizations. This is very, very important. When your vendor sends you a SOC 2, you think, okay, they're good. That SOC 2 basically will, most of the time, from what I've seen, will say, doesn't include subservice organizations, which means that there's an assumption with that SOC 2. It basically says there's an active third-party risk management process that's already in place. You've got compensating controls, and anything compensating is covered in a contract with your client. So please be very careful to do that checkbox. SOC 2s are great. I'm not saying anything bad about SOC 2s. I'm just saying that don't assume that just because someone sends you a SOC 2 that there's downstream controls that are in place. SOC 2s just exclude them a lot of the time, right? So please understand those limitations as you're looking forward. All right, and then those limitations, of course, look for those excluded areas in the SOC 2s and look at your own contracts and agreements, and then your guidelines. Every company is different, so it's really up to you for your guidelines. Okay. So we're coming up here to the top. We received the documents back, right? We know who we send it to. We sent the questionnaires out. They sent us back information. Again, we're going to go back to those published documents, right? In our IRM, we have a policy that has control objectives that says, okay, you've got published docs. Okay, this is insufficient. Here's when you escalate. Here's this answer over here. We accept it. Here's an exception. Oh, well, this is kind of a fuzzy answer. Let's go down the fourth party path and the fifth party path and start asking about the vendors pass of our data, right? These are things we want to ask. So, and then how do we open an issue? So any of those things that we don't like that we want to track long term, we all need instructions on this. So our goal for this section really is we've got those questionnaires back and now they're completed. Okay. So now we have our things done. We're in operational kind of steady state, right? So, we've assessed our vendor, we've received the questionnaires. Now we need to know when do we do this again? Do we do this again? Like, do we do it every year? Do we do it every 2 years? Do we do it when something happens? Do we do it when we see a breach on TV? Do we do it when a contract is up or legal calls us? Do we do it when an SLA is breached and they're not meeting their contractual obligations for us? So we really need to make sure in our documents that provide guidance for how this program works in IRM, we need to provide instructions on how really this works long-term for us. So goal of this section, long-term active measurement and monitoring. And so with that.
Okay, good. So on the demo side, where we're going to start is one of the first things that Karina said here is your third-party risk program has to be aligned to your governance and those regulations. And she called out HIPAA. So let's start with HIPAA. And we'll kind of take a look at those authority documents first. So under favorites, I'm going to go ahead and go to our authority documents. So in our system here, we have a few different authority documents. HIPAA, let's go ahead and take a look at HIPAA here. So I think the key thing is really you want to have whatever regulations, whatever you want to have those captured and connected to your third-party risk program somehow. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of this language here and see. We happen to be doing it here in ServiceNow, but it doesn't have to be in ServiceNow. You can have it in any tool that you have it. So we've got the HIPAA regulation here. And if I scroll down, we just have a very, very narrow subset. So we have 2 citations here. And I'll go ahead and click on the first one. And for those that aren't aware, the citations in ServiceNow are pretty much word for word, depending on the version. These aren't edited at your company. These aren't changed at all. These come directly from whatever entity is doing the regulation or the governance, so forth. So this one here is Business Associated Agreement BAA requirements. So there's requirements here for BAA. Some of what is mentioned, there's got to be appropriate safeguards when handling PHI or e-PHI data. It helps to ensure the business associates are held to the same standards of privacy and security as covered entities. So here we have one of these, and oh, sorry, one thing I forgot to mention. So we're doing this on the latest release of ServiceNow. So this is Vancouver, the Vancouver release, and some folks may be on the vendor management, the VRM product. Some may be on the newer third-party risk management product. Everything in VRM is still valid in third-party risk management. There's some slight changes and so forth, but I just wanted to set that context as we go through this. So here we have one of those citations for BAA requirements. And if I scroll down here, we'll see the control objective. So there's an actual control objective. I refer to them also as policy statements. So we have a control objective here. This is mandatory BAA completion, right? So control objectives in ServiceNow relate to your policies and your policy statements. So it's really important that these get connected together. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this control objective here, and let's kind of take a look at this for just one moment. So here, this is unlike the citation, which you don't edit, that comes directly from the authority. This would be the specific control that relates up to your policy. So for this one, for our fictitious company here, it says, according to third-party risk management policy, all vendors who interact with PHI or e-PHI must undergo a BAA assessment and have a signed BAA on file as long as they are providing services to our organization. It says it right there. And that's one of the controls they're monitoring against. So I'll go ahead and scroll down here, and we can see a few different things. We can see under policies, there's a third-party risk management policy connected to this. We can see some controls. And the other thing that we can see here is assessment metrics. So some of you may not be familiar and might wonder what are assessment metrics. So I'll go ahead and click here. And what we have is in ServiceNow, there's a connection between the controls in your risk management, your policy side of the house that actually connect to your the third-party risk module. So these are just some of the metrics that are being captured specifically for BAA. So I'll walk through a few of these. So all of these have BAA qualification. So what you're going to see a little bit later is the questionnaire and the assessment that goes out to the vendors. The example we choose is specifically around BAA for HIPAA here, but you can see the actual questions that we're asking them, right? So I'll go through a few of these. We didn't enter the whole BAA questionnaire. We kind of picked a subset just for this demo to kind of get the idea of what's happening. So some of the questions that are going to be asked: do you carry cyber insurance? If so, please include your certificate. And then for those that are technical, you can see the data types here as well and some of the other technical information. So do you have a contract or a master service agreement with our company? Yes or no? And then this one right here, do you have a definition for PHI or e-PHI information? So these are some of the questions. We'll have another view. Sorry. We'll have another view as we continue, so we can really focus on the questionnaire, but really the questions you ask and connecting those in the right places within a tool, in this case, so that you can get visibility on those at a higher level. That's really one of the key things that's going to strengthen your third-party risk management process. So I'll go ahead and click on policies, and now let's go ahead and take a look at the policy. So here,
Josh, can I just drop you for 1 second? Someone asked is the questions that you're talking about, these are questions in the TPRM questionnaires being mapped to control objectives in the IRM solution. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yep, that's absolutely what it is. Correct.
Clarify that. And also, where are you getting the content for authority documents?
Great question. Karina, do you want to take that one where we got our authority document HIPAA information?
Or we can get back to that after the demo. That's fine.
Okay, sure. We can get back to that one. Yeah, good questions. Yeah, and Roslyn, feel free to stop me when I'm on something because I can't see the questions as I'm going
Not a
through
problem.
this. All right, thanks. So for our policy here, in the policy application service now, we're just going to focus in on the third party risk management policy. So I would assume most of you are familiar, maybe some of you aren't. The persona we're using is John TPRM Manager. So John is the TPRM manager. They own the third party risk management policy. And I won't go through too many details, but essentially you can see the policies here in ServiceNow, kind of goes through the different sections and so forth, some PI related information. And this policy is specific to our company, right? So some other general best practices is your policies you shouldn't have a separate policy based on different regulations. You should have one third party risk management policy that encapsulates everything and keeps getting improved and updated over time and so forth. So the last thing here I will show you at the bottom under control objectives, we only put 3 on here just to get the idea, but essentially we have that mandatory BAA completion, which is one of the controls we'll be monitoring, and it's in the category of third party and supply chain oversight. And there's 2 others here. So this one here is all third parties engaged with us must undergo assessment and have a signed contract in place. That's also connected to HIPAA. And this last one here detailed the number of people at the third party that have privileged access. That's also a good one, right? There's a lot of data and security policies around privileged access that happen across the board. So there's a control we have in place for that we would want to monitor as well. Okay, I think that covers, there's so much to talk about here, but I think that covers what I want to go over on kind of the policy and compliance side and how that links to it. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and go to the vendor and third-party risk management workspace, and we can kind of take a look at how we would see some of these things over there.
Can you also address how you're bringing the questions in from TPRM? That was another question that came up.
How we're bringing them in? Sure. I'll include that as I go through it at the right point.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So as far as personas go, we're going to be John, the third party risk manager. The other personas that use this is going to be the assessor and the reviewer, depending on what role they have and so forth. So since we have different levels of, I guess, understanding, I'm going to go through a really quick overview of just this kind of module. So on the home screen, we have third parties and engagements. Assessments can be done specifically on a third party, or it can be done through an engagement. And if you do it on an engagement, it's kind of a specific scope, as in you're scoping out a specific area in that engagement. We have some of that information. We can see top risk areas here, security, environmental, and so forth. So this is really the overall page where the third party risk manager would look at things here. I won't dive too much into due diligence. Due diligence is kind of a newer feature in third-party risk. There was a webinar in August from the product owner that kind of talked about this really well. But there's due diligence requests that can go out. Then you have your risk activities. Let's go ahead and let this load. This is more of kind of management as you go through it. Then there's a map that's going to connect to where your third parties are, just if you want a visual representation. And then tasks. So the task screen here this is typically for the assessors and the reviewers. For those types of personas, they'll have their tasks, and it typically can be tasks working with different vendors or suppliers, as they have tasks that need to occur and also issues that come in with the issue management, right? A lot of the time, either a question isn't answered correctly or there's not enough information and there needs to be some follow-up and some back and forth. And the last one here is the list. And then on the list, we can see just all the different applications and so forth. So the example we'll use under all third parties, we're going to use this sample vendor called medical device vendor, right? So we'll go ahead and click on this, and we have our medical device vendor here. So we've got some information about the vendor, they're a strategic partner of ours. Now, in this situation, they've already been onboarded as one of our vendors, and they've already gone through their onboarding process. But there's some other assessments that have happened. So if I click on more, we can kind of take a picture and see what's happened, what hasn't happened. So a few other logistics here. I'll click on third-party contacts. So under third-party contacts, we just have Monica Turner here as our primary contact. So third-party contacts, you need to have at least one that's a primary contact here. And these are going to be on the vendor side. Who are you engaging with? You need at least one person there. They can add other vendors, and they can support you within the system on that side. So this is the vendor side. And at the top, the vendor management, that's going to be on our side as the company, on the company side of this. If I look under more here, I can see there's two assessments. So I'll go ahead and click on assessment here. So there's two assessments that's happened. We can see one is closed, which is a security assessment. So there's a security assessment that's already been done. And there's a BA qualification risk assessment for third-party medical device company that's in the generating observations. So let's go ahead and click on this and kind of look at this assessment and kind of find out more information about it. So I'll answer the question. One of the questions asked is, how do we generate those? So as far as your assessments on the technical side, right, you configure them in the tool, right? You can use a third party, you can even write out your questions in Excel and you can import them. So there's definitely a few different ways you can come up with your specific questionnaires, or, like IRM Authority and other companies like us, we have these that we do for our customers where we'll help them craft them. So there's a lot of different sources on how you can put them together. It's a little out of scope for today to show the configuration of how that's done within the tool. But that would be part of the setup as well. So I hope that covers the question that we had there. Rosalind, any other questions come in related to this?
I think a couple of questions are around authority documents and authoritative sources. So I think that might be Karina, if you might.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had run for coffee. I really apologize at that moment.
It's
So
early, so I get that.
I download this from HHS straight from the source. Any regulation, I always go straight to the source. So the HIPAA is always downloaded from HHS.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
And one of the other questions that came in is, can you give some recommendations on how to come up with good quality vendor assessment questions, which I think you addressed that in that there's, IRM Authority can consult with folks on their questionnaires and give guidance there. And then with the most recent version of the product, there are a lot of what I would say is starter templates for a variety of regulations in the product. So there's a whole host of depending on location and or industry and or regulations that you need to deal with, there's a lot of content in product now to get people started. But I would absolutely advise that you consult with someone or determine with your legal department the appropriate questionnaires and wording, because the questions are critical, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So continuing on, we have our BA qualification assessment here. So let's kind of take a look and dive into this one. So we have the different states across the board. First, it was submitted to the third party. A response was received, and we've actually looked at that response. And now for this one, we're in the generating observations. So we can see that there was a risk rating of 4, which is a low score that was given to this. And we can see here, there's a questionnaire, the BA qualification, and there's a document request for SOC. So part of part of the questionnaire is we asked for what documents do we need and what are the specific questions. So there's a few different ways you can set this up. My recommendation, and I think ours is, if you have specific documents you need every time, do them as a document request. Request those documents in the system, and you can get those all added to ServiceNow through document requests. I'll talk through, there's another way you can do it, which I'll talk through in just a moment. So this one's 80% completed. I'll go ahead and click on this questionnaire, and let's take a look at this from a different view. So now that we looked and this has been received, let's take a look from the third-party risk reviewer. So when I click on this, it'll go ahead and open the questionnaire. Can you see my screen with the questionnaire open?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. So this is the third-party risk reviewer view. So as the reviewer, I can add my review comments, and I can look at the notes and comments to see the history if there's anything in there. Now I'll scroll through the questions, and for this one, there were a few issues it looks as we go through it. So one of the questions was, do you have a contract terms and conditions or master service agreement with our company? They said yes. And then we asked them, please specify who provided signature and the fully executed date. They just wrote CFO. That's it. They didn't give us anything else. So one of the things the reviewer can do is, this is a box for them. They can check this, include this question when creating an issue. It's not checked because an issue, as we can see with the word issue here, an issue was already created, so it's been done. So for each question, you can include internal comments for your third-party risk and for your company to see if you have comments on what they're doing as you're talking to your vendors. You can kind of put in some of the internal comments. These are particularly useful when you're looking back. A lot of the time there's a story of, maybe somebody's new, there's a new, somebody got promoted and you're new to the department or something like that, and you don't have the history and you've been using the tool for a while. So particularly finding out and using those internal comments and sections here really tells the story in the system. So it's not siloed and through emails. So that's really something that helps a lot, is keeping everything in the tool here. So you've got your internal comments and then comments for third party. This is what's going to be sent directly. In this case, it's Monica Turner. It's going to be the comment that's sent directly to the primary contact on the vendor side. So please provide a name of the person. The CFO is not good enough. You can provide details as you ask. Down here, it says, do you sign an NDA with each company that you work with? They said no. And then internal comment, we need more information from these folks. And then the comments for third party, it says, please explain, right? And this has been linked. So one other thing that some people aren't aware of, you can have multiple questions in your assessment collected together in your issues for issue management. So when you want follow-up, or you don't like the responses, or you need more help, an issue will get created in ServiceNow to kind of capture that, and you can group the questions together. The next one here is, do you have an audit firm? Yes, please provide the frequency. They do so. And then for this question here, do you carry cyber insurance? Please include a certificate of insurance detailing cyber coverage included. There's an attachment icon here, and it says, if no, please specify why. So this is, you can do document requests, but if you have more of an explanation than a document request, sometimes you can ask for attachments in the questionnaire. So depending on what you're asking for your vendor, or you want information, sometimes it depends on the specific use case. Using document requests are great. It's a great way to track things. I sometimes like to include some of the questions for attachments in the questionnaire itself. So it kind of depends on what you're asking for and your relationship with your experience with different vendors for that as well. We'll scroll down, and then the last questionnaire, do you have a definition of PHIE, PHI? Yeah, and this is a great question. Anything HIPAA related to ask this question, especially since yes, there are very clear definitions of what this is, but not everyone has a clear understanding of that. So it's good to be on the same page to make sure your expectations are being met on the vendor side as well, like we have it here. So we have that information here, and we give them a chance to give us an explanation of what they're asking for. And then we can also include any comments to them. If I check this comments for third party, I can include a comment to them as well and ask them any questions for this. Okay, let's see. Rosin, any questions on this before I move on?
There was a note that someone needed to add an additional field for questions, each question for responses. And they also noted that if they look at the questionnaire to see the additional questions, then they have to navigate to notes. Is that correct?
Yeah, so they're talking about the configuration. So right here, so this is a question. So when you set up the questionnaire, you'll ask a question such as this, and then there's in the configuration, there's something called additional information. That's you can actually rename the additional information, which is what we did here. So the additional information, we renamed that part of the setup to whatever you want. So instead of asking for additional information, you can modify that for what you're specifically asking for.
So that was just a configuration change that you made to make it simpler for the.
Yeah, it's actually a great one. So instead of asking, so you can say, here's your question, provide additional info. You can actually modify the additional information when you're configuring your questionnaire to ask something relevant for your specific question, and then it'll show up here. So it does show up on the notes. That is correct, but that's not the only place it shows up. It'll show up with the specific question here, and some of that information can be captured in the notes if you have a back and forth. So the additional information, every question when we have a follow-up section, like here, provide frequency details. We modified the additional information to ask specific questions to get better data from our vendors as we go through this. I hope that was relevant to what they were saying.
I think so, but I think they might need a little bit more help afterwards, so we'll follow up after the call.
Okay, sounds great. All right, so now let's go back to our other screen here. So that was kind of diving deeper into the BAA questionnaire. This one's 80%. You can make all the questions mandatory. We did not, just to show you that they don't have to be mandatory. So 80% is fine for our example here. If you have too many questions, or I think this is a subset. Our original questionnaire that we pulled from had almost 100 questions in it. So it's a very, very in-depth questionnaire that we had. Some other things I wanted to show, I'll click on details here. The notes here for work notes and comments here, this is connected to the questionnaire as well. So as they ask questions and so forth, the work notes will be connected. The work notes are connected to the questions within the vendor portal and the views for when the vendor actually enters in information and provides it to us. Some other things I wanted to kind of talk about here, repeat assessment here. So one of the things Karina also mentioned is triggers. And I think there was a question early on about triggers. So this is all based on the configurations for how you set this up. So based on the type of partner relationship, if it's a strategic partner, a supplier, depending on that relationship, you'll have specific questionnaires organized based on that relationship. And the other side is you can set how often do you want this to reoccur. So the first use case is, you'll set your standards within your policy. We assess our vendors annually, something like that. So you can have a general statement around how often you assess vendors, and then on specific, these can also be connected to specific due dates and triggers. So I think the exact question is, we had a document that was expiring. Can we reassess them? How can we handle that? Yeah, you can configure it in the tool to reassess based on specific dates for when the document expires, when an engagement ends, when a new engagement is beginning. You can set up engagements to automatically be created as well. It's a combination of a few things. Configuring the tool with automation, setting up your policies in place to have kind of general standards across the board. And some of it's also going to be ad hoc, right? Things may change from time to time, and you may, it's out of scope for this demo, but the demo I'll reference back in August that the product owner for third party risk went into details of how in the employee center you can do ad hoc demos, which were very good. So, ad hoc requests for modifications. So if you're offboarding a vendor, if you need to reassess a vendor, you can also do those ad hoc, and there's a great process for that as well. I'll pause there and see any other questions.
I think some of the other questions were about the portal, which I think you might have been going to show.
There's two, so there's two portals. There's the employee center portal, and then there's the vendor portal. So vendors will have a separate portal that they can log into. I thought it'd be best to, let's see, those two aren't in scope for this demo, but let's see. I'm not sure if I'll be able to connect it here. I can take a look and see maybe when we go to the Q&A portion, because I don't have it set up, but I can set that up when we kind of go to general Q&A. Let's go back to that, and I think I'll be able to touch upon that as well.
Great. Can you expand on some of the recommendations around breach notifications?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Karina, do you want to start off on the breach notifications? And I think I'll set the stage, because I think there's two different types of breaches depending on whether it's public or not, right? So a great example is you see something on the news that so-and-so company had a breach. What do you do? Or maybe it's not public. So Karina, do you want to talk about that a little bit and what some recommendations are?
Yeah, so I think from a, running your operations and running your company perspective, so for instance, I have very deep-rooted kind of roots in security, right? So I get notices several times a day of leaks and breaches and, somebody's lost data. So I'm always looking for data centers in those notifications, because all I'm thinking of is which one of my clients has one of those data centers listed as a vendor when they did their assessment, right? And who do I need to call to notify them and say, hey, warning, warning, go find that contract that you have with that vendor that says this is when they notify you of a breach. The unfortunate thing is, a lot of times when we pull up a contract, the contract says, well, we're going to notify you of a breach within 6 months, maybe, if we feel like it, if we feel like maybe you're involved, but we're going to figure out a way to not have you be involved. So these are really important kind of elements that you want to go through inside your own company to determine how quickly is your third party vendor or whoever is providing any sort of contractual obligations to you, contractually, how fast do they have to notify you that they may have lost your data, that they've discovered a leak, that they have a security violation? Remember, folks, Securities Exchange Commission, right, has on July 26th has now required that material weakness, cybersecurity breaches be disclosed within 4 business days. 4 business days. So those contracts that we have sitting on our shelf versus what may get filed with the Securities Exchange Commission, 8K, for those data centers and those companies that house your data, there may be a discrepancy there. So this is something we want to get our arms around, definitely. That's the non platform specific answer.
So
Yeah, I guess.
I
Oh,
was going
God.
to say, beyond breaches, is there a best practice or what are the most common triggers to send out reassessments and what's the frequency of that? I think this ties into this conversation.
I would say as soon as you see it as soon as you get a notification that someone's been breached, send them an assessment.
Yeah,
Are there
so two things. That's true. The other thing I do want to mention is, let me show you here. When setting up your data in the system, there's something called third-party risk areas. So specifying and using your risk areas and connecting those to your vendors helps organize your data so you can kind of basically know which vendors you want to contact. Sure, you'll definitely know some of the key things if there's a specific company, but if there's security, third party risk areas like security risk or data risk, if you tie that to each one of your specific vendors in here, it makes it much easier to automate it, right? So maybe it happened to one vendor or there was something out there, but you want to assess everyone. So for our example here, it's just compliance risk, right? So you can specify your third party risk areas in more detail and you can connect those to all your different vendors and third parties. And that'll just make it easier on the tool side so that you can, instead of just having to specify these 4 vendors or 5, it'll make it easier to categorize things.
Yeah, and as we were talking about how people use terms interchangeably, one of the things, domain is another good example of the risk areas. So you want to think about all the risk domains.
Mm-hmm.
We just call them risk areas within the product. Another question, how many types of assessments are there usually?
Good question. I mean, so well, I'll start it off and then Karina, you can answer that. I mean, out of the box, it's flexible, right? So out of the box, kind of, especially with the new Vancouver release, they have with the due diligence, you want onboarding, right? Whether assessment or whatever you want to call it, you have an onboarding questionnaire assessment that you ask them to kind of get them onboarded to set the stage. Then you have your engagements, and it just depends whenever you're engaging in a different area with a vendor, right? So let's say um, you're working with a consulting engagement with a company, and then you have another engagement with that company where they also are a supplier agreement or it's different scope for different areas. You would want to set up an engagement to assess those various parts of that area. So, and
Mm-hmm.
then the other side would be compliance based. And then Karina, I'll let you kind of add from there.
Yeah, so really it's the word risk, right? So how risky is that third party for you? So is this a vendor who owns all of your golden eggs, right? He has the most important data, your client data, your general ledger data, your consumer privacy data, your PII data, right? If that vendor contains all of that information, well, you may want to have a very diligent set of questions in front of that vendor or third party. And then for the vendor, the third party that doesn't have all of that information and isn't that critical to your operations, well, maybe they get a lightweight questionnaire, right? Maybe it's not that important to have them be hounded and have the cyber insurance policy be sent and show me your perimeter security controls and tell me how many people have privileged logical access to the data on their side, right? I mean, it's really, again, it goes back to that identification, that first point in the presentation where we talked about who is this vendor? How important is this vendor to me? And what kind of questionnaire do I need to send them? Right? That's where you're doing that risk gauge based on your governance structure.
Can you talk a little bit about frequency of assessment? So a couple of people were asking, can we set frequency of an audit? Can we set frequency of assessment? Can we set it every 2 to 3 years? Talk a little bit about frequency if you could.
Hartaj, do you want to take this one? You can. The short answer is yes.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a simple one. How from the tool side, it's however often you set it up. Annual tends to be the go-to to set it up annually, to do annual audits. It ties into a lot of different things. In integrated risk management, you do audits annually. Same with third-party risk, doing an annual audit with them. So annual is kind of the go-to. I think doing it quarterly or something like that, it's a lot of work. I think the other thing you have to understand is you got to be realistic with your vendors. So people bid in this space, depending on the size of the vendor, especially the big vendors, it's so hard to get information out of them and to get any kind of relevant and good quality things. A lot of them tend to send you the generic packets. So I think you also have to be realistic with what, depending on the size of the vendor supplier you're working with what you're able to get. So that's, I think, something good to consider as well.
And maybe if you have a low risk vendor, maybe if they're not that critical for your operations, then maybe you want to send it every 2 years or just send it 6 months before their 36-month contract expires, just to see how they're doing and, check to see if they've met SLAs. And if you have no interest in moving to another vendor, just do it one more time before you re-sign a contract, just to see how they've been performing, and, before you go into an auto renewal for the next three-year
Yeah.
engagement.
And tool side, it's flexible, right? Once a year, twice a year, annual, whatever. You can just configure ServiceNow to do anything that way. It's pretty easy to do.
So I know we're coming up on the hour. Can I just ask one more question? Can you talk a little bit about integrating some of the vendor data? So if vendor data and contracts and things are stored in other systems, can you talk a little bit about the integration, how that's pulled in or how it's used within ServiceNow?
So I'm only going to say just pull it all into ServiceNow. There's really no need to have it everywhere else. It's almost, your published policies all need to be in ServiceNow. Sure. So look, if you have to have it all over the place, then at least figure out what those triggers are, right? Those key areas for the contracts and the legal things that may have, if your contracts are stored in a different platforms, there's always kind of triggers that happen, date-driven contracts, contractual obligations. So at least pull those in, at least build your governance program for your third-party risk management in ServiceNow and pull those triggers in from HR, from legal, from finance. All those things influence and matter for your third-party program.
Yeah, and I would say that the general answer is we've got open APIs that will connect to the systems that you need. And we do have people that, do use ERP systems for a system of record and will transport information back and forth. And that's also a question. Somebody asked about importing and potentially aligning the SIG or SIG Lite. Yes, you can, and we do provide and use SIG and SIG Lite in many instances. So whether you're using that in its entirety or using pieces of that, absolutely, it's available and provided through ServiceNow, not as an additional fee.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you for your attention.
Yep. Do you mind just putting up the last slide so we can go through in additional ways they can connect with us if needed? Just there's a few URLs on there that I want to make sure that your information is shared on the question and answer slide. Great. And then if we click through, there's a lot more resources from ServiceNow, from our impact program to training and certifications and expert services that are available to you. And then finally, if you're interested specifically in risk content, there's a lot of different ways that you can connect with us as well in the community, signing up for more events, registering for those webinars, and or participating in our YouTube playlist, because we put a lot of content up there to try and educate folks. So with that, I will say thank you so much, guys, for the in-depth information. I know it was a lot to throw at people. Please come to us or IRM Authority with questions. I really learned a lot today, being more on the TPRM side than the IRM side myself. So thank you for that. And we look forward to seeing you again at future events.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Have a great day, everybody. Bye, guys.
Bye.